Welcome to today's topic. I am really excited to talk to you about our lesson today, our teaching topic, which is what to do if you find yourself eating the whole bag of chips. If you find that you sit down and you just can't stop eating that whole pan of brownies, that whole bag of chips, that whole box of cereal, that whole bag of whatever. We're going to talk specifically about how to stop that habit and what are some of the things that are contributing to that and why you're struggling with that, okay? So I would love to hear maybe what's one food that you tend to just go bananas for. I know for me, in my past, before I have healed my relationship with food, that pizza was a big binge food for me, where I would just eat the whole pizza. Also brownies, I would eat the whole pan of brownies. So curious if you have one of those foods, you can either just put it in your head for yourself or you can tell me and let me know. So let's kind of talk about what you might be experiencing if you are going through overeating, okay? If you're eating the whole bag of chips and you are not feeling happy about that. So you're probably experiencing, number one, overeating. You are eating past your level of comfortable fullness. Do you relate to that? I know I did. When I was binging on pizza or overeating, that food, it was like I definitely was full, right? Like I was overriding my body's signals to me that, hey, you're full. Your stomach's full right now. So you are probably experiencing overeating. You're probably experiencing uncomfortable fullness at times. When we eat so much food in one setting, our stomachs become distended and we can just feel rather uncomfortable. One way to kind of assess your hunger or your fullness is to ask yourself, is it a pleasant sensation? Is it neutral or is it unpleasant? So you're probably starting to experience unpleasant fullness as you have demolished the bag of chips in front of you. And I'm going to use bag of chips as the example, but obviously just insert whatever food for you tends to be one of those foods you feel out of control around. You're probably experiencing regret. I know, after I'd binge, I would just feel like, ugh, why did I do that? I would often feel disgust. So self-disgust, just upset with myself. I would also tend to feel sad. So I would feel a sense of despair or hopelessness. Why do I keep doing this? Can you relate? Why do I keep going to this food that I know I tend to binge on? And why do I continue to not have control around it? You also might be experiencing shame. So when we feel bad about doing something, we tend to feel guilt. But then shame is where we take the guilt that we feel and we make it mean something about our core self or our core worth. So you might be really judging your inner self, your core self for this behavior. You also might be experiencing isolation. I know for me that when I was engaging in more binge and overeating behaviors, that I did it by myself. Okay, I wasn't like, hey, I'm gonna invite some friends over, I'm gonna order pizza, some brownies, some popcorn, and I'm just gonna eat it all right in front of them. Never has that pretty much ever happened in my life. Binging and overeating took place in isolation. So you might be experiencing more isolation or even loneliness because you are experiencing these binge episodes and you tend to be by yourself when you're doing them. You might be experiencing negative emotions, right? Negative emotions that are either contributing to the binge or just after the binge. I'm going to posit for you and just kind of my hypothesis for you is that it's actually not negative emotions that tend to cause the binge. There's other things that are contributing to the binge, and then you tend to feel negative emotions after that. But sometimes you might be having some negative emotions and coping with food a little bit. But emotional eating is not as big a thing as people tend to think it is and as it's promoted in health and fitness communities. And then you're probably engaging in dieting behaviors. So if you are having loss of control eating foods, then you are probably then reverting to restriction certain days. I know I've seen this a lot in my experience as a weight loss coach where clients would tell me, I would just like overdo it, but then they have days where they really undereat, like 400 calories, 800 calories, 1,000 calories, where they just like go way under. Okay, so I know for me, when I was experiencing this last summer, I wanted to change. And the thing that I wanted to change was I wanted to stop binge eating. I was not happy that I was engaging in that behavior. I think that's the first pain that a lot of us feel, right? We're just like, we do the binge, we overeat, we feel overly full, we feel disgusting, we feel regret, and we're like, I don't ever want to do this again. Can you relate to that? Okay. So I know for me, what I wanted to initially experience was I wanted to stop binging. I wanted to just not do this behavior anymore. I also wanted to feel like in control around food. I wanted to feel that like I could order a pizza and just eat a couple slices. I wanted to feel that I could bake a pan of brownies and not eat the whole thing in one setting. I wanted to feel like I could buy a box of Wheat Thins and not just like demolish these crackers like my life depended on it. I wanted to actually eat foods that I enjoyed, and I wanted to be able to eat them without anxiety. I was having so much anxiety around these foods because I felt out of control around them. I also wanted to not be thinking about food all the time. So one of the negative things when you're in a binge restrict cycle is you start to think about food and obsess about food and just be thinking about it a lot. And you probably also want to feel safe around food. So you want to have the experience that like you feel safe, you feel peaceful, you feel free around all the foods that you're around. So let's talk a little bit about why you're experiencing this behavior of overeating, and then why you're also experiencing like all these negative emotions. One of the things we have to do is like really zoom way out when we are experiencing binge or overeating behaviors. We have to move far away from the problem to see like what the actual source of the problem is. When you are looking at a tree and it's not producing any fruit, you don't just look at the leaves and the branches. Like you need to think about what's going on at the root system. Why is this tree not producing fruit? So I want you to think about like, we're going to do a root canal, okay? Like we're going to get to the root of the problem that's actually contributing to your overeating. So it starts ultimately with worshiping the thin ideal. This is the top level view. You're worshiping the thin ideal. And it's not just you individually, it's the culture that we live in. So we live in a culture that worships the thin ideal. There might be subcultures within like the greater American culture or even the greater global culture that worship curvier women. But even those cultures tend to still have certain like parameters around thinness, or like it might be acceptable to have really curvy booty and boobs, but like society still wants you to have a tiny waist, like hashtag Kardashian look. All right. Which is very like manufactured with plastic surgery and like lots of assistance. So we're starting to see that even this perhaps like acceptance of like greater curves in society still comes with parameters around acceptable curves. Does that make sense to y'all? So one of the things that is really contributing to your binge and overeating is worshiping the thin ideal. Okay, so that's at the top. So what happens when we worship the thin ideal? Well, we compare that ideal to where we're currently at, and we make a judgment or assessment about how we measure up to that. Okay, do I meet that ideal? Do I not meet that ideal? What should I do? Should I change my body to reach that ideal? Is it possible for me to reach that ideal? Is this a goal worthy of pursuing? Should I devote my time and energy to pursuing this thin ideal? And we make a decision, sometimes conscious, sometimes not, that, okay, I'm going to start pursuing this thin ideal. I'm going to devote my time and energy to seeing if I can mold myself to this thin ideal. So then we start to think about, okay, well, how do I do this? Like, how do I mold my body into a thinner, smaller body? And then we start to think about dieting behaviors. We research diets, we seek out coaches who can help us shrink our bodies, which is what I used to do. Okay, so this is me through 5 years of weight loss coaching coming out the other side and being like, I want to teach something different, okay? There's plenty of people who still teach dieting to shrink your body. So you might be out there looking for someone to help you shrink your body, researching exercise and nutrition things that could help you shrink your body. So now you're in like pursuit of an actual program or plan to help you make yourself smaller. And all of those programs, nutritionally, exercise-wise, all of them are going to involve some type of restriction or rules. Even programs that talk about being like, oh, you can eat all the things and no forbidden foods. And like, I even tried that with my clients. I even tried to be like, no forbidden foods, because I could tell that restricting foods wasn't good for them, but I still had to give them some type of parameter to cause weight loss for them. And so even programs that might tell you that like all foods are allowed, there are still rules if that program is helping you shrink your body or it's helping you lose weight. It's either like the quantity of it you can eat, the frequency, the type of food. So then what happens is you start to restrict foods. It may be very subtle at first. You might feel that like, oh, this isn't that big a deal. Like I'm just cutting out soda, or like I'm just eating less pizza, or I'm just eating less cookies. But what can happen is you get into a negative cycle. We call this the dieter's dilemma, which I love the phrase of that because I love alliteration, but because it's truly a dilemma. You get stuck between a rock and a hard place. You get stuck between, am I going to pursue the thin ideal, or am I going to pursue a healthy relationship with body and food? And you can't have both, okay? And people who tell you can have both they're not really telling the truth about either themselves and what's going on for themselves inside or for their clients, okay? So when you have this desire to be thin, then what it leads to is starting these dieting behaviors, these attempts to change your body and make it smaller. And then you start to experience deprivation and or cravings. So if you're somebody who likes to eat dessert every night, and to make yourself thinner, you decide, I'm just going to eat dessert 3 nights a week, which seems like a very reasonable goal, right? Seems like a very healthy approach. Now you are actually still depriving yourself of something that you may want. So through deprivation comes a feeling of cravings for things. It also can just create an inner rebellion when we feel that our autonomy is being threatened, when we feel that we are not the true agent in our life and doing the things that we want. We can just rebel against whatever rules are being put upon us. Human beings desire freedom. We desire to pursue the things that we want. And so anytime we have some type of limit on us, it can trigger a rebellion or some type of rejection of that plan or rule. So then what happens is all of a sudden you reject the diet, you overeat, you go off your plan, you have a bad day, you cheat, all the words that we hear in the dieting world. You engage in that overeating or binge behavior, and then you start to regain weight, right? And then you desire to be thin again, and it starts the whole cycle over again. So that's called the dieter's dilemma. And this is what's causing you to binge. So through restriction, in your attempt to reach the thin ideal, in your attempt to change your body to match what you're seeing and what you perceive as this better body that you should match, you are engaging in restriction. And then through restriction, you're having cravings and deprivation. And so you're either rebelling and or just like, I have to eat this food, right? When things are forbidden, we tend to want them more. And so when you create scarcity of a food by denying yourself the food, by restricting it, by eliminating it, what that will eventually lead to is binges. And it will lead to binges of either foods that you do want, or it will lead to binges of foods that seem like not a big deal for you. Like, why am I just spooning nut butter out of the jar? Like, nut butter is a healthy food. Like, I don't normally binge on it. Why am I just binging on this nut butter? Well, if you are not getting satisfaction from your foods and you're feeling deprived, then you will be more likely to seek out satisfaction in the volume of what you're eating, and you'll tend to go overboard on foods that like you didn't even really want to eat. Does that make sense? I was having this last summer where I was restricting myself from sugar because I knew that if I ate sugar, I would gain some weight. I liked sugar, I missed it, but I thought, oh, I'll get sugar-free candy and I will eat sugar-free candy as a good substitute. Yes, it still has some fats, but it fit my rule of like no sugar. Or very little sugar. And so I got this sugar-free candy, and then I found myself just like binge eating the sugar-free candy because it still wasn't satisfying what I really wanted, which was a real Reese's peanut butter cup, not the sugar-free version. So now that you're in restriction, now you're in binge, now you're in the overeating cycle. And this is what's contributing to you sitting down and eating the whole bag of chips. And you may think it's because you don't have self-control and you lack willpower. And you may think it's because the people around you are eating those foods. And social influence can cause us to sometimes overeat because of distraction. You may think it's, your husband's tempting you by bringing home the ice cream. You may think all these things, but they're really a smokescreen for the bigger, more toxic issue, which is worshiping the thin ideal and trying to pursue a smaller body or maintain a body that you have shrunk. So remember that dieting isn't just actively trying to shrink your body. Dieting behavior and dieting mentality is also maintaining your shrunken body through restriction. So a lot of the coaches you see out there who say, like, I kept the weight off, like you can do it too. I specialize in forever fat loss, blah, blah, blah. Question that. Because what you're not seeing behind the scenes is their real life day-to-day behaviors. And I promise you that they're restricting things. They're either restricting the quality and the type of foods they're eating, or they're restricting the amount they're eating, and or they are over-exercising. They're doing a ton of movement weekly, daily. Okay, so that's really why you're experiencing this challenge. Now, how do you stop it? How do you break this habit? So that the thing that you need to do is you actually need to let go of the thin ideal. You need to reject the thin ideal. And I know this can be very confronting for people and not something that is easy to swallow or deal with. And I want you to understand that I completely know what you're going through if you're feeling that, because I actually struggled with this when I became an intuitive eater. I went through a period of time where I tried it and I gained weight and I was like, I hate intuitive eating. This doesn't work for me. I'm done with it. Screw it. And then I was still struggling, still not happy. I was like, no, still isn't working. Dieting still doesn't work. And eventually I came back to intuitive eating, and that's when I went all in on it and was like, oh no, this does work. I just had to fully commit to my healing. But it required me to give up worshiping the thin ideal. And I am still someone who lives in a smaller body, and I'm aware of that. And even, with me gaining some weight, I'm still in a very small body according to society standards. In my twisted world of body dysmorphia, my body looks much larger than it is. And I still struggle with, oh, should my body be smaller? Those are those thoughts from diet culture. But we can reject those thoughts and reject this behavior when we first decide to reject the thin ideal. Does this make sense? Let me know, if this is clicking for you, because I know it could either be a new concept or a confronting concept to kind of start to swallow. No pun intended. So one of the things that you just need to do is you need to start allowing your forbidden foods. If you find that all you do is overeat the chips, you know what I want you to do? I want you to buy as many bags of chips as you need to have of this particular flavor, and I want you to keep it in your house. I want you to keep 5 bags of the Doritos, whatever you overdo, keep them in your house and give yourself permission to eat as many Doritos as you want. Okay? But you have to truly give yourself unconditional permission to eat the food in order for you to heal this issue. You cannot just give yourself partial freedom. And you will not be able to give yourself unconditional permission to eat until you have given up the thin ideal. You have to be willing to shelve that goal and shelve that desire in order to heal your relationship with food. So if you want to stop overeating the whole bag of chips, you actually need to allow yourself to eat the bag of chips. And there's a whole process called habituation where you do this with your forbidden foods, and it really creates a lot of freedom for you. And I will share more about that. I'm also going to be teaching how to do that in my new coaching program, which you can learn more about at the link in my bio. You can even drop your application. Applications are open for my new program. I'll be sharing more about it with you over the next couple weeks. But if you're just like an eager beaver and you're like, I want to learn more, I want to apply, I'm like already into this, Heather, then you can click the link in my Instagram bio to apply, and then I'll reach out and chat with you about next steps. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope this was super valuable for you. Remember, your biggest takeaway is if you find yourself out of control around a food and binge and overeating, you are actually still worshiping the thin ideal, which is causing this restrict binge cycle that you need to break. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to y'all soon.